Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Water Rights Fee Stakeholder Meeting. We will get started in a couple minutes, give some time for people to enter the meeting. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. This is the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Rights Fee Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through the Zoom and the webcast platforms and is also being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I'm the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services. Before I get started on the screen, on the welcome screen here, for those that are just watching the broadcast, the web link is there under the video.calipay.ca.gov. And then if you'd like to participate via Zoom, please send an email to waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov with the subject line Water Rights Fee Meeting. Today, we have many of the Fee and Revenue Branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that the meeting runs smoothly as possible. If at any time throughout this event, you find that you're having technical difficulties, please email the email that's on the screen right now. Again, I'd like to repeat it, waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov. Also joining us today is John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. Also joining me and helping with the presentation is Cassandra White, who is one of the Staff Service Manager 2s in the Fee and Revenue Branch. And I'd also like to introduce Josh Werblin, who is new to the branch. I think this is his second week, and he's learning the water quality and the water rights fees, and he'll be participating more in these meetings in the upcoming meetings as we move forward in the fiscal year. So welcome, Josh. Individuals attending via Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment. If you're joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask a question by emailing the email on the screen. In the past, there has been some delays in the broadcast through the webcast. Therefore, through the meeting, staff may pause so the broadcast can catch up to the listeners. Again, we thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to this 100% virtual meeting space. And we are doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. And with that said, I just want to mention that, yes, today we're 100% virtual. However, for the next couple of meetings, we will be looking at doing, an in-office or in-meeting place at the Cal EPA building in Sacramento, and have some type of joint where we're having, of course, a sit down in the meeting room, but at the same time doing a combination of a virtual Zoom platform type meeting. So more to come on that. So I just wanted to go over just a few meeting guidelines for today. Remember to use the handouts that were sent out to you via email. If you don't have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing the documents on the screen, and you can request a copy after the meeting, or the handouts are posted on the Water Board's fee webpage. Remember, any technical difficulties, please email us. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Remember, you can submit comments and questions throughout the event by, again, sending them to the email address. And then for the meeting to run efficiently and stay on track, we're requesting each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have clarifying questions to your original question, and that is accepted. Once your question is fully answered, we are going to move on to the next participant's question, and you will be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, we respect all opinions and input. However, if discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is to discuss water rights fees, then I'm going to ask that the participant and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve the appropriate staff as needed. So at this time, let's just review the agenda. So the second item on the agenda will be, which is attachment 1, which will go over the Water Rights Fund budget cost drivers. We'll then go to attachment 2, which is the Water Rights Fund condition. We'll have an open discussion, and then we'll talk about next steps. Before I move on to the agenda items, I'm going to introduce John Russell, the Deputy Director of Division Administrative Services. And I'm going to ask him if he has any opening words for the meeting.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you participating in this meeting. I know it takes a little bit of time out of your day, so we really do value your input, though, so thank you for attending. We have some new information at today's meeting, namely the Water Rights Fund condition, and it's new just in the sense that we haven't been able to show it for the last 2 or 3 years as our accounting system caught up to where we should be. And it's a lot of information, so we understand that it's going to be a lot to digest today. And I just wanted to say that if you have any questions as you go over it after this meeting, if you have any questions or need clarification or anything, don't hesitate to contact either David or myself or Cassandra, either by email or phone call, whatever you prefer. And we can work with you individually, or if you have a group that you want to talk with us about, we'd be happy to do that as well. So we're open to any and all questions that you have, or more information if you need it. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Thank you. And before we get started, I also wanted to introduce Eric Eckall, Deputy Director of the Division of Water Rights. He's also online with us. So before we, let's move the agenda item number 2. Cassandra White is going to go over attachment, excuse me, we're gonna start with attachment 1. Yes, the Water Rights Fund budget cost drivers. And before we get into this, I just want to mention that, you know, these numbers are based on the January's proposed budget. We understand that it's early in the process. We have two more iterations of the governor's budget before we start making the decisions on our staff's proposals to the water board. So please keep that in mind as we get into the reviewing the fund condition statements. That keep in mind that we have actual accounting data for fiscal year 21-22. Everything beyond that, like the fiscal year we're in 22-23, is all based on projections. And as we start to get more accurate accounting reports as the year goes on with the actual expenditures and revenue data, then we'll be able to update that as we move forward. So I'm going to, again, pass this to Cassandra, and I'm going to have Cassandra go through and update you on our budget cost drivers, which basically means that from our fee setting budget back in September, when we went to the board on September 20th, the budgeted number then compared to what's in the budget number now, based on, again, the governor's January proposed fee setting budget. So I will toss it to you, Cassandra.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon. So table number 1 shows, as David mentioned, the fee setting budget from last year, which was about $34.1 million, compared to the governor's January proposed budget for fiscal year 23-24 is just about $34.7 million. And it's a net difference of $678,000 or a 2% increase. And the second table will show us some of the costs driving those increases. The first one is state operations. And you see it has a minor increase of $450,000 at about 1.3%. And state operations include salaries, healthcare, and retirement. Plus, it reflects the decreased continuation of the cannabis program. The second cost driver is pro rata. And as we mentioned this morning in the water quality meeting, pro rata is indirect costs incurred for services performed by the state central service agencies. A few examples of those agencies are Department of Finance, State Controller's Office, and Department of Human Resources. The cost is applied to all state agencies, including the water boards and each of its programs. And then the last cost driver is CDTFA, which is the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. This allotment is for the expenditures incurred for processing the Water Rights Fund annual invoices and collection activities. There was a slight increase of $6,000 and no measurable percentage change. And that wraps up our cost drivers. Again, the Water Rights Fund has increased overall by $678,000 at 2% increase. So that concludes our look at the fiscal year 23-24 budget cost drivers for the Water Rights Fund. Are there any questions at this time? Any email questions?
No email questions at this time.
Thank you. Then I'll turn it back over to you, David.
Okay, thank you. And we can, at any time, we can come back to this, and or as John mentioned, as you start to look at the numbers, if any questions come up after this meeting you'd like to discuss, please reach out to John, myself, or Cassandra. I'd be more than happy to discuss it. So basically what we're looking at here, of course, is our proposed budget of $34.7 million for expenditures. And again, this is based on the governor's January proposed fee budget. Let's move to the next slide. So attachment 2 is the Water Rights Fund condition. And as John mentioned, we have not shown this for multiple years. And the main factor was because our accounting office was implementing the new state accounting fiscal system known as Fiscal. And it took several years for our accounting office to go through and close each of the years. And then with that said, also build like the reporting capability, which we now have of being able to have reports that show us revenues and expenditures in the program. And so what you're looking at here is an overview of the fund from fiscal year 17-18 all the way through some projections for 23-24. The fiscal year 17-18 through fiscal year 21-22, those are actual numbers. And when I say actual, when we report to the state controllers and Department of Finance on our board's fund conditions, these are the numbers that are reflected on what we refer to as the water board's fund condition statements that go over, and then eventually they do get posted onto the governor's galley documents, which are known as his fund condition statements. Where I want to start is for fiscal year 21-22, because that's one of the last actual years. That's the last actual year from last fiscal year. And let's just kind of walk through some of these line items. I'll try to go slow, be clear and concise. And then again, if please ask any questions. And if I don't have a response, I definitely will be working with our accounting office and get us a response. I went through this earlier with the water quality fund condition or WDPF fund condition. And that one is not as complex. I mean, this one is not as complex as the one is mentioned in the WDPF. But again, let me start with fiscal year 21-22. We start with a beginning balance, and that beginning balance in this fund was $8.3 million. And that comes from the carryover amount in 2021. And then we have what's known as prior year adjustments. And I wanted to kind of touch basis on what prior year adjustments means. And there's three factors that come to what we refer to as a prior adjustment. One, has to do with contracts. And so like many of our funds, there's contracts involved. And when a contract is executed at the water boards, of course, there's a term on the contract. Usually they're like 3-year contracts. And they're executed for a certain dollar amount. And just as an example, if it's $1 million contract and the water board will encumber that whole $1 million. And then after the 3rd year, for example, when it's the contract's about to expire, if the contract only spends $500,000, it means the other $500,000 is going to be reverted back into the fund. And then our accounting office takes measures to track that, and it becomes a prior year adjustment. So that's one factor that impacts our prior year adjustments. The second has to do with basically staff charges. We have plans in place to ensure that, this doesn't happen, but at times it may, where an employee charges to the wrong charge codes. And it may be identified outside of the fiscal year. And so amended timesheets are needed. As a result of that, charges that hit the water rights fund or hit another fund, and then those charges are adjusted. That's another factor that comes into what we refer to as prior adjustments. The third thing, and it has to do with how revenue is booked with the California state accounting practices. When an invoice is generated, that invoice is generated as revenue. So as an example, if we invoice $30 million worth of bills invoicing, the accounting office will book the full 30 million However, if, for example, we only collect, 29.5 within a year, our accounting office goes back and makes those adjustments of basically of $500,000. So that would then have an impact on an adjustment. Now, keep in mind that we're still we would still be working to collect that revenue, working with CBTFA and so forth. So there's, if the revenue comes in after that year, then that revenue gets reported, and that can also have an impact on the prior year adjustment. So when I look at our beginning balance in 21-22 of 8.3, and I noticed on the fund condition here, there was multiple years of us having, a positive prior year adjustment, and so bumped up the revenue. So our adjusted beginning balance for 21-22 was almost $9 million, $8.9 million. So the next line item is our regulatory fees. And so we're tracking that we reported $30.3 million in regulatory fees. And again, this regulatory fees comes from our permits, our licenses, our pending applications, revenue from our FERC projects. And then as you scroll down, we have other revenue. And other revenue comes from miscellaneous services from the public. Times when someone would come in and request copies of documentation in the water rights program, and be a small fee for those services. Smith, which is the surplus money investment funds, and any enforcement and/or if there's any fines and penalty revenue, that all gets lumped into our other revenue source there, and that was about $407,000. Now, I will say that there were two negative adjustments in the water rights fund in 21-22. Let me start with the first one. And so there was back in 17-18, if those that might remember, there was a loan from our underground storage tank cleanup fund for our Sigma workload. So during that time, there was a loan that was transferred in of $2.25 million. And basically it was kind of a startup. And then once we started generating fees for Sigma, that loan would be paid back. With that said, there was never any expenditures, basically, or at least the program never expended the $2.2 million. What our accounting office noticed was that the documentations did not get put into the Department of Finance properly. And so that payment, basically that money of $2.2 million sat in the fund, which is another reason why our beginning balance stayed as high as it did, because we kept this $2.2 million in the water rights fund, and it was never spent. And so it was, requested that we have to, pay it back and submit it back to the underground storage tank cleanup fund. So that's basically what happened. I do understand that it was noticed in the process around 1920, but again, there was also working through the maintenance and trying to become knowledgeable on working on a new accounting system. So it took a few years to figure out how to transfer money from one fund to the other through fiscal. So that money that was put into the water rights fund and not spent from the cleanup fund in 17-18 is now being transferred back into the underground storage tank cleanup fund, and that was done in 21-22. And then there was another adjustment of $1.1 million, and I mentioned this before. AB 84 is basically, it was a pension buy down that we were directed. So the Department of Finance gave all organizations amount to buy down some of the pensions that were originally with the cost up front from the general fund, and that we were allocated a dollar amount, and the Department of Finance worked with us on distinguishing what funds we're going to take, what portion of the payback buy down. And so, as I mentioned in the WDPF, there was amount taken out of there. And then this is the share that was directed from the Department of Finance. Again, it's Assembly Bill 84. And you might have remembered last year, we talked a little bit about an expenditure line item for pension buy down. And now this is reflecting the actual dollar amount that was taken out. So when you look at our total revenues in 21-22, our total revenues were 27.3 million. And then we come down to the water board state operation cost. And then our state operation costs were 28.4 million. Basically all the core regulatory activities involved with the water rights program. And then we come down to other state operations. And other state operations, as Cassandra mentioned earlier, California Department of Tax Fee Administration, their share cost. We pay a share cost to California Environmental Protection Agency, and then also pro rata. And all of these are line items in the Budget Act. And that's equal to $2.8 million. So the 28 and the 2.8 shows our total expenditures of 31.6 million, which basically meant that we had a structural deficit in the program of 3.8 million. So our revenues compared to expenditures that in this year was 3.8 million. Now, granted, I think the cause of that are basically the two repayments, or the one repayment to the loan repayment, and of course the transfer for the pension buy down. Those are basically what is impacted and drawn us into a structural deficit. With that said, though, we still had enough reserves to end the fund balance at $5 million, which is basically about a 16% reserve. So as we move into the current year, there's the carryover at the end of 21-22 to the start of the current projected fiscal year, a beginning balance of $5 million. And where I land on this right now is the following numbers are, projections of regulatory fees based on everyone we build. And then when we get down to expenditures, those are all budgeted numbers. Now, as we look at our expenditures, we see $1 million for cost recovery expenditures. This is regarding the California Environmental Quality Act consultation. So it's a cost recovery. We list it because we have $1 million of authority. To even it out on our projections, we lay out $1 million up top. So it becomes a wash as the year ends. We also reflect, because we have authority for Sigma in here also. And we haven't had very minimal Sigma revenue come into the program. And at this time, again, zero basically Sigma expenditures. I will mention that that the program looks like it's going to start to ramp up. And we may start seeing some expenditures and some revenue in here. The reason that I break it out separately is because it's been authorized to track, again, revenues and expenditures in the program, but the revenues for Sigma can't be used, of course, for permits, license, pending applications on the water rights side, and vice versa. So we're going to continue to track it separately. So looking at our projected year for the year we're in 22-23, and again, this is a budgeted number for our expenditures, and based on prior year expenditure trends, I would anticipate that the expenditures would come in slightly lower than our budgeted expenditure numbers. Looking at the right now, if I'm looking at the line that says surplus or deficit, our revenues and expenditures are in line with each other. We try to get as close to zero as we can. It's about 161,000 in the positive side. So again, looking at this right now, revenues and expenditures are in line with each other. Still keeps us about 15.7%. At a fund at this size, I would say we, perhaps draw around 10%. But we want to continue to evaluate it. And then as we move into the next fiscal year and the fiscal year that we're setting fees off of, if the net column over basically says if we do no fee increases on all the programs, we would draw the fund down, 13.9%. But part of my concern is we see the surplus deficit. You start to get a deficit of about $500,000 from expenditures to revenues. And it gets to a point where now you're having to do increases to ensure that you're, covering your cost, and that you're lining up again on an annual basis with your revenues and expenditures. So I just, as an example, staff and I got together and we just reflected, well, what would keep us close to, revenues and expenditures in line? And it looked at about a 3% increase. And as you can see, a 3% increase would generate about $34.9 million in revenue. Expenditures would be projected about 34.7. So it would basically put us into about, our a surplus of 210 for the year. And understanding that having a fund balance of about 5.4, which is about 16%. So we recognize that may be a little on the high side, but again, we're also recognizing that we are covering our expenditures and revenues in that year. Before I get to questions, the other side of the house here, we adjust fees, of course, for permits, license, pending applications. And then we also try to then look at, in a vacuum, our FERC expenditures and those projects, and the FERC side of the house of covering other state operations and their percentage towards the reserve. So we look at that very closely. Staff's monitoring it. And so we'll make a decision if we need to, increase fees on that side of the house. One of the original looks at it for this fiscal year, and again, it's early in the process, but it did look like that we were generating accurate or sufficient revenue, let me use that word, to cover FERC's expenditures. And so we may not need to make adjustments there. But again, early in the process, and I just wanted to just kind of tee that off, as part of these conversations. So at this point, I know there's a lot of information, and I'm going to open it up to questions. John, I think you're first in line. I see your hand up. So good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the presentation. As the State Water Board staff often does, it's a very helpful, informative presentation. Appreciate that. My question, I guess I have a couple of questions. I'll just first, have you or the staff evaluated how well you've been able to project both expenditures and revenue? There's not a lot, or I've only had the opportunity to take a look at the material from 2021, and at least there it looked like some of like the projected expenditures were a lot lower than what you were anticipating, and so I'm curious to know whether you've done an evaluation. How are you projecting? Are you most frequently coming in as projected, under, or over?
So John, that's a good question. We now have an opportunity because we are now getting reports, and just up until about a month ago, we just got all the reports for 21-22, and we just received our first, referred to as our first expenditure report for 22-23, which is only 1 month of data. So what I mean by that is the fiscal year is July through June. So our accounting office has just closed our expenditure numbers for 22-23. So what that will allow us to do, and especially for next meeting, I'll be able to have, I want to say probably 4 or 5 months of true expenditure data. And I can look at, certain areas of the water rights fund or water rights program to see where the charges are at and see how that compares to the budgeted number. So it does put me in a better position to project where I'm at for 22-23. I don't know if Eric wants to chime in on this. In some of the years past, we were directed to work on drought-related work. And there were times when staff that were charging to the Water Rights Fund was moved over to drought and worked on general fund. So there are sometimes when we have to then kind of pivot a little bit, and our projections, again, based on those type of directions, could be off just because of the fact that what we thought was going to happen at the beginning of the year, we have to pivot and adapt and change the way that staff is charging. So there are, of course, factors that come in. The other thing, though, like I said, I think we're in better shape to project out expenditures just because we now do have reports compared to the last 3 years where, I've said this before, we were somewhat in the dark. But John, for you, I do agree that as we move forward through this fiscal year and we get to next stakeholder meeting, I'll have a better idea on projections for our state operations. Well, and as a result, what that does is, if our revenues come in, it starts to build even the reserve, and it gives staff an option to basically, go to our board and or program and at least have one option that says, look, we can offset fees or costs with our reserve and help minimize that. Again, that's an option as we kind of move forward and we start to see if our expenditures are lower than our actual fee revenues that come in.
Yeah, David, I appreciate that. And just to finish my thought and let others ask questions before I ask a separate question. Yeah. But I was thinking about this a little bit more basic, that the State Water Board has been holding these stakeholder meetings for, I think, almost 20 years now.
Yes.
And it seems to me that what the board can do is go back and look at what information you were using when we've had these meetings, what you thought your revenues would be and what your expenditures would be, around this time of the year, and evaluate how that played out over time. Just again, looking at this, it seems as though there is a difference, and I think that can be helpful for a number of different reasons, including the type of reserve. I'm always uncomfortable by the fact that there's a 16% that you're shooting for, particularly when we're like for me, the farmers that I represent are burdened by a significant cost just for the water rights. I mean, the Westlands Water District farmers are paying over $1 million. I think closer to like $1.5 million a year for this program. And you look at what the end balances are, or the surplus. The surplus is over just a short period of time. It seems like there's very low risk in terms of the deficit being anywhere near a 16%. And so it's just all that type of information that seems like it could be very helpful, because how accurate will, I think, help dictate what type of a reserve is appropriate.
No, I think you bring up a good point, John. I think it's an exercise that we can look into. One thing is that we can, look at a point in time, whether it's when we adopted the fee, that here was our budgetary expenditure. Now that we have actual expenditures, we can compare that with what the budget was, plus the budget drove what we set our fees off of, and then we can also then look in house and see, well, yes, we invoiced this amount, but then what was also collected, through CDTFA and also our internal application fees on our total revenue. So I think there are some things we can look at, and we'll get together with staff and see if we can move something forward where we have there's some type of chart we could present at the next stakeholder meeting on this. Stephanie, I think you are next up. Good afternoon, Stephanie. Stephanie, if you're, okay. Oh, go ahead.
Coming in, yes. I'm Stephanie Rodden. I'm a ranch owner, and I have several stock ponds. And following up on what John said, I'm interested to know how these changes will affect my water fees per each stock pond that we have.
Well, it's a good question. We're not. What I'm reflecting right now is that I'm not proposing any fee increases or showing any adjustments to fees along with your stock ponds. I did show an example here is if we were to adjust fees by 3%, that it would align us with our revenues and expenditures in the fiscal year. I do recognize that we have a slight reserve going on, so there's an option for me to start looking, and as we move forward at our next budget iteration in May for our June meeting, to kind of come up with an option if we want to help use some of this reserve to offset fee increases. I don't have the fee structure in front of me per the each of your stock ponds, but if, for example, if we were to say do a 3% increase, then your fee would go up basically by 3%.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, Bob, I think you're next in queue, so if you want to ask your question, please do.
The reserve, thank you, and thank you for the courtesy and for Eric's presence as well, since I know he's just a little busy, but he's probably multitasking. The reserve is roughly triple the water rights or water quality reserve level. Not asking you to make a comparison, but a consideration would be, as Mr. Rubin aptly pointed out, 3% doesn't seem like much, but the water rights fee payers like Kings River and Modesto Irrigation and some others, it's a big operating cost. So we've done buy downs in the past, and maybe some of that 16% could, and I know sometimes we pay the piper, but consider it. And as the beans are counted in June, maybe you could surprise us with a bit of a buy down. Just a thought for your consideration.
All right, thank you, Bob. And I mean, I'm going to say this, just kind of managing funds. When you have a larger fund like the WDPF, the percentage could be a little bit lower compared to smaller funds, right, like this, right, where maybe we're shooting around 10%. Because I've seen some economic uncertainties come in, as we had to walk through with as we went through COVID and things like that, and we try to help offset our costs with the reserves. But point taken. Eric, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add at this point.
No, I was just coming off screen to note to Bob that I was paying attention, although I was multitasking at the same time. Like David has noted, we're still pretty early in the overall arc, and this is the first time that we've gotten this type of detailed accounting in a couple of years, and so that's one of the considerations that I think we're going to look at as we go forward and as we start to figure out what's finally in the governor's budget and how we work at things. And I think right now we're calling for, a 2% increase to the size of the water rights fund, but how that translates into changes in fees, or whether or not we will recommend fees, we do not know yet. Or sorry, recommend changes in fees, we do not know yet.
John, you have your hand up? Yeah,
and another question, and it relates to the point that you were just making, David, on terms of uncertainties on revenue. I guess the question is that a true statement? And I don't mean that to be offensive to you, but looking at the history over the last 20 years, again, it goes maybe and touches on my earlier point, is comparing projected revenue versus actual. It seems to me that the revenue has been relatively stable. But that's a question that related to mine and maybe to yours in terms of how important is the reserve fund because of instabilities. Obviously, expenditures are part of it, but I think that those are probably more predictable rather than less. But related to the revenue, it would be helpful. I'd be curious to see that the revenue broken down in terms of projected versus actual from the annual fee payments versus the transactional fee payments, because it's really the transactional, I imagine, that are more variable, and I'm curious to see if those are predictable. I think breaking it out may be helpful.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. And regarding the predictability of revenue, I will say, yeah, it's pretty consistent. We can predict our water rights, unless, of course, a project, larger project, works with staff, and it's I don't want to use the word like go offline, but they've reduced their water rights permit. That could have impacts on our fee projections. The one thing I see on the expenditure side is, and I'll say this has happened in the past, we have no control with the negotiations that happen with the unions, with our classifications, like our engineers and geologists and scientists. They're all represented by different unions. And although the budget may get signed in July, there may be, and we already set our fees, there, negotiations happen all year round. And I've seen this happen in the past where after July, come, October, November, the negotiations have been worked out. And so we get some additional expenditures that hit the fund. And having a reserve does help us cover those increases. So again,
David, how much do you know how much those increase? What's the type of swing that you've seen?
I don't have the detailed budget information, but again, when one person's salary goes up, say by 5%, that also means the indirect cost and overhead, everything also gets loaded, and that's all out of our control. The Department of Finance controls that. So that has happened in the past, and we've been able to use reserves to cover those. A lot of times, of course, all the employee compensation and all that is negotiated and approved before July 1. But again, I've seen that. And then again, I kind of mentioned this as an example, not that we're hoping we ever go through this again, but through COVID, there were, times when we were able to use some of the reserve to help, cover some uncertainty also.
I appreciate all that. And, Westlands deals with the exact same issues, right? I mean, it's not any different. But I guess all of the type of information that I've been raising here is information to determine whether there's whether there's room in this the water right fee adjustment to maintain it as the current rates, lower it or increase it. And again, I just want to stress that when we go through our budget, we're thinking about what is the impact of our decisions on those that are responsible for paying for generating the revenue for our budget, and it's just a significant amount of money that just Westlands alone is paying, but you've heard it from others as well. And so, you know, I understand the predicament that you're in and the needs that you're trying to serve, but the fact is, you know, we've looked at this water right fee. We understand it's a kind of a zero-sum game, but there's you know, we have farmers that are coming out of multi-year zero surface water allocations, struggling, trying to mitigate for some of the impacts of the drought. Fortunate with some allocation this year, and you know, anything that you can do to try to better predict so that you're not collecting money that may not be necessary, it would be greatly appreciated.
No, I recognize that. I appreciate your comments. And I was, I want to say, kind of pleasantly surprised, like I said, when we finally got some of the county reports. I didn't anticipate that we'd have, you know, this much of a reserve. I feel like at least we're in better shape making some decisions as we move forward. Again, we're not proposing anything at this time, but we do have an opportunity to come up with some options that are, you know, is going to, you know, help the program as we move forward, other than the other side of the house where you know, doing increases to help, you know, build the reserve. So, John, I appreciate your comments, and we definitely noted them.
Thank you.
So at this point, let me ask, are there any questions through the email system?
No questions on email this time.
Okay. So I recognize that this was the first time we've shown this. This is the first time we've been able to reconcile our fees and our revenues and show a fund condition statement in the past 3 years. I do anticipate for the current year, for 22-23, I'm going to definitely have better revenue and expenditure data moving into the June stakeholder meeting. So we'll be able to update these along with, you know, after this meeting and in between us now and working into June. The feed revenue staff will be coordinating efforts with water rights staff to, you know, look at options and look at any other areas of our fee structure that may need to be adjusted. But again, this was just kind of the opening meeting just to kind of spark the conversation and show you where we land with you know, the governor proposing his expenditures for 23-24. So if I can move to the next item, which I believe is now open discussion. We'll go to the agenda here. And before I get to open discussion, Bob, you have a question?
I had 2 comments for open discussion. That's all. Sorry.
Okay. Well, before I get to that, Eric, I just want to give you the floor one more time. If there's anything you want to discuss on, you know, what the future, what you see. I know you're a busy man right now, and I appreciate you participating today.
Yeah, no, nothing to flag right now. You know, there are some bills in the legislature pertinent to water rights modification, but so far those don't really seem to include a ton of staff. And those are primarily what our drivers are. And, you know, how those turn out, we don't know. And we have to just kind of keep tracking them as they move through the legislature. And then more broadly, I think it's really helpful that we now do have these accounting numbers, and you know, we did get a lot of resources through the general fund as part of the last budget cycle, and those have all helped to really minimize cost drivers for fee increases beyond what we've already seen. I think I'd leave it at that. I do have to hop off at 2, but again, if there's other questions, route them through David and John, and we'll work with them.
Thank you, Eric. And then
Yeah, really,
John, you chimed in, so.
Yeah, just really quickly, I wanted to just point out what Eric just said. We had a really good year last year in terms of receiving general fund, at least for the water rights, the drought related work. So that created some of the excess reserve that we weren't anticipating as staff were charging to the general fund that we got rather than the water rights fund. So for those of you who've been paying attention to the state budget, you know that was a 1-year blip in general fund that we got. General fund this year is I don't know, they're projecting a deficit. I think it was 25 billion or so, and that's projected to go up. Some of the other departments had quite a bit of money clawed back that they had previously been awarded in general fund. We did not, simply because most of our general fund was related to drought. So finance and the governor's office made sure that we could keep most of it, although we did have some that we had to give back related to PFAS and a couple of our other local assistance type programs, but they were not water rights.
Thanks, John. Bob, I will give you the floor.
I didn't know you were giving things away. That's great. Thanks.
I'll charge you, Bob.
Two things, and I'm going to have to email Eric because they were both for his ears. One is on the data rights modernization. Oh, there he is. Two things. Data rights modernization. Let's consider some sort of interagency fee. For example, Department of Finance charges for OSA services. Well, just to recoup the cost, especially the 50% borne by the ratepayers, not to interfere with transparency, not punitive, just the cost of data access, especially as it gets complicated. Integrating data is not going to be cheap. And the second one is, a question is, are we updating the permit fees annually like we're supposed to avoid all those huge decadal cost increases?
We take a look at the permit fees each year and evaluate them accordingly. So we do that. We haven't updated all of them. We don't update each and every single one of them each year. It depends in part how many we get, right, which factors into how much of an impact that actually makes on the fees as a total.
Yeah.
So, but yes, we are taking that step. And in terms of the water rights mod fund, there was the general fund component of 2.5 million, and then the fee fund of 2.5 million that was for ongoing staffing costs a couple of years ago. I think we want to be really, really careful about the concept of charging for data access. I think that's anathema to everything that we're trying to do. And so I just want to nip that in the bud right away. That's not something I'm willing to contemplate. And just because I'm not willing to contemplate it doesn't mean others are, but I just want to move us away from that topic before it even gains traction.
Okay, thank you. I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, I do have to hop off. Thanks all.
Right.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, I think next online is the Margaret Advisors.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. This is Kelly Flores with Margaret Advisors. We provide compliance consulting support to cannabis farmers in Humboldt County. I'm not sure this is the right forum, but I hope it is. The first thing I want to mention is that we did not get notification about this meeting until this morning. So we didn't have any opportunity to provide comments or send emails. So that was a little bit frustrating. If you could take a look at that notification process, that would be helpful. The other thing is regarding the billing of water rights. This has caused ongoing confusion over the last couple of years. And we'd like to recommend that you really take a look at how the water quality enrollment billing is done, because they have a portal where we can go in, we can see what invoices have been issued over the last couple of years, which ones are paid and unpaid. And they have a link where we can go and have our client pay that bill right away. With the water rights billing, it looks like that's being done through CDTFA. Folks are getting these bills. They don't know what they are for. There isn't proper, documentation or information on the bills. Some of them are being ignored. because they don't know what it is. And we have to decipher them. We don't have any way of knowing who's current on having their water right bills paid and who isn't. So, there's a lack of transparency in the billing process. And I think that it creates some delays in you guys getting funding, to be honest. And we certainly want to keep our people compliant. Folks want to pay the bills that they're supposed to pay. But if the information is not readily available, is unclear, then it causes a lot of problems and causes delays and issues, and the potential for water rights to get canceled because people didn't right. their bills over time. So we would like to ask that you guys take a look at that, and because there's an existing system with the Water Quality Board, that you look into potentially piggybacking off that somehow. That would be incredibly valuable for these farmers. Thanks.
Hey, appreciate the comments, Kelly, and the feedback. Definitely, we'll work with our water rights cannabis staff who have contacts at CDTFA, and we'll coordinate and try to figure out, look at the existing process and see ways of efficiencies there. I realize on the water quality side, there's a lot of information that goes into those invoices, and we have more control of those invoices than what CDTFA issues. But let us look into that, and I'll have some talks with our internal staff and coordinate with the CDTFA. So I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you for your time.
And then on the notification part, we actually have 3 different LIRIS lists for each of our stakeholder fee groups. There's a water quality one, a water rights one, and then a drinking water one. So if you can't figure out how to sign up for all 3 of those, and it might be complicated, just let us know, shoot us an email, and we'll help you out there. But you really do have to get signed up for 3 of them so that you get the information for each particular group.
Okay, I was just surprised to get notification about a meeting that's happening the same day. It was confusing. I mean, I'm glad I'm able to, provide some feedback, but it just would have been helpful to get that notification earlier.
Yeah, because we did send out information a couple of months ago about all the upcoming meetings and things. So it may be internally too that, we need to talk to some of our program staff and have them reach out to all of their programmatic stakeholders as well.
Okay, we'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. So are there any other questions for those online, and/or I'm asking you, Gary, and the email if there's any additional questions?
Email question from Nicholas. Asking, why is the CDTFA imposing a 10% penalty for non-electronic payment of fees that exceed $20,000 per month?
That I'm not, I guess, prepared to answer, because I'm not sure if that even impacts our fees. Keep in mind, CDTFA invoices a lot of fees, especially like corporate and business fees throughout the state. So I have not heard that. I will look into that, but I'm not aware of that. But I'll take a look at that. And we have your email, so Cassandra, we'll look into that. Any other questions? I'm not hearing any right now. So we'll just move to next steps. Our next scheduled meeting is June 12th. And we will be looking at having kind of a combination meeting at the Kelly PA building. We'll have a meeting room, and then at the same time having the online virtual Zoom experience within that meeting. So if you're not able to attend, you could still come in line online and join the meeting in the same platform as we're doing today. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, if there's, as you're reviewing some of these tables and in the handout today, please don't hesitate. And you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to John, myself, or Cassandra. And again, we'd be more than happy to help coordinate any of your questions. And then after the meeting, again, if there's follow-up or, items that you may want to see or listed on the agenda for the June meeting, please reach out to us. Either, again, you can call us or email us, and we'll do our best to look at adding those to the agenda, or at least, addressing them at the next stakeholder meeting. So with that said, again, I want to thank everyone and appreciate everyone's time, taking your time out of your day to join us today. Again, our next meeting will be June 12th. We'll sign off now. And again, thanks everyone for joining today, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.